little bit scared now because she's sticking to time. So I'll have to bomb my way through this. So I'm going to talk about the Sikh Court, which was inaugurated, if you don't know, in April 2024 through a religious ceremony at Lincoln's Inn in London, where a number of judges and registrars, many of them women, pledged allegiance to the Akal Takht, which, if you don't know, is a politico-juridical seat of power for Khalsa-specific Sikhs. It started its operation, the Sikh Court did, on the 1st of June this year. We've had some amount of feedback on what's going on there, and it describes itself as an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, operating within the Med-Arb framework of the Arbitration Act 1996. And I want to make sort of two sets of points. One, on the conducive context. I'm identifying 5 conducive contexts, a bit following on from what Rumi just said there, for the emergence of this Sikh court and for it gaining legitimacy and being basically, there being sort of quite a level of silence around it. And then secondly, the impact that it's having on rights. And I will be talking about rights and not on values. I'm finding the whole sort of values conversation a little bit murky. So I'll be focusing on rights as indivisible, universal rights. So the first conducive context has to be the push since New Labour, actually. I want to put some of the complicity back onto the state. I think the state has played a really big part in this. To multi-faithist governance, where shrinking public welfare provision has gone hand in hand with increased power and influence of religious organisations, including on social problems, and Richard can speak to this, where they have been complicit with perpetrators or have actually been the perpetrators. So the Sikh courts claim that it will offer culturally sensitive approaches. Over the last few years then, through that, religious identities and religious frameworks have gained prominence, significance. It's like probably the main identity within the local community that I'm from. The Sikh courts claim that it will offer culturally sensitive approaches and mete out justice according to an amorphous Sikhi principle is particularly alarming because it is part of a wider movement reflected in the Sikh Summit report to fend off state intervention and increase levels of self-governance over Sikh populations in the UK. The Sikh court is a prime example of the way that multi-faithism undermines a language of rights and privileges the claim to religious freedom over everything else. And it returns us to a hands-off approach to violence and abuse within minoritized communities, passing minoritized women off to differential systems which have never afforded them any protection. The second context is the intensified pressure on the secular legal system, and we do need to address public sector cuts. Cuts to legal aid as part of the shrinking welfare state, and the difficulties in finding legal services and lawyers. One of the big selling points of the Sikh court is that it will circumvent the delays and the costs to enable greater access to justice. But I'll explain in a minute why they will, in effect, block access to justice for women and children and undermine their rights. But it's in this space, created by problems with secular courts, that has become a key lever for the Sikh court. And besides, they are using the space within English law, the Arbitration Act 1996, to legitimise their existence and their operations. The third is the differential racialization of Sikhs, particularly Khalsa Sikhs, as good migrants and as key allies for the British state. And this means that Sikh fundamentalism and indeed Hindu fundamentalism has kind of been in the shadows, and it lives very comfortably within state structures. And indeed, at least one key Sikh fundamentalist activist has been awarded an OBE. The other important context is the resurgence of Sikh fundamentalism in the UK over the last 3 decades, but exponential increases since the Pledge Orange campaign in 2012, which I can explain in the discussion. So resurgent Sikh fundamentalism can be seen everywhere now in gurdwaras up and down the country. Those gurdwaras that used to have a real opposition to sharing Jarnail Bhindranwala's literature. He's the archetype and the icon of a separate Sikh state, otherwise known as Khalistan. That material can now be found widely within gurdwaras in the UK. But also in the last few years, there have been particularly sinister protests and violence to stop interfaith marriages taking place within gurdwaras, of Sikh women specifically. There's not been attention to Sikh men in those interfaith campaigns. And the assertion of something called the Rehat Maryada, a highly gendered code of conduct that tells Sikh women to serve and to defer to their husbands. The Rehat Maryada is a moral code. There is no doubt in my mind that even though the Sikh court are claiming not to be a religious court, which is bizarre, they intend to, and they will institutionalize moralistic, not rights-based religious policing that we have been subjected to and fighting against for decades. Finally, in terms of conducive context, there's wider racism and immigration controls, and we do need to put that into the room. Women that cannot access services or legal aid or see the widespread racist violence that has just taken place this summer may turn inwards. They become even more dependent on the provisions within local communities. And I'm talking about the impact on women and children as a form of communal coercive control. So Professor Karima Benoon documented a long time ago that religious laws are not good for women. They infantilize women, making them the property of fathers and husbands, and they undermine women's financial claims in marriage and in inheritance. Law and education, these two spaces have been pivotal spaces for religious fundamentalists in the UK, seeking to impose their particular version of religion on the members of their group. Just 2 more points. Religious courts are not good for women. So Southall Black Sisters has historically joined forces with Mariam and One Law for All because religious courts assert the importance of keeping family units intact. They add to the already existing communal pressure on women within minority communities to remain within marriages, even where there is violence and abuse, to forego their ability to raise their children as they wish, and they consistently compromise the rights and autonomy of women and submit them to the rule of the father or the husband. And this is clear from the early interviews that were given by Baldip Singh, who is basically heading up the Sikh court, whose statements clearly connect up with other fundamentalist concerns. He's raising an anxiety about falling numbers of Sikhs, about keeping the family unit together, about ensuring and imposing a religious upbringing on Sikh children, and keeping Sikh women in check. They are becoming too assertive. They are asking too much. They are asserting their autonomy. So forget the reference. There's multiple references to the number of Sikh women that are involved in the Sikh court. Put that aside because that's performative. This is a patriarchal institution that intends to impose a particular version of the religion on Sikh children, and it is intended to curtail the autonomy and the rights of Sikh women. I'll just give you one example. I suppose I need to finish. Oh, sorry. Just one example is of Baldip Singh's.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry, you're fine, sorry.
Okay, so in one example, I thought there was a timer somewhere, and I would have heard it. In one example, he undermines a secular court's decision to allow a separated woman to cut her son's hair. She works through a range of practical difficulties for him to keep long hair. Kesh, long hair, is a part of the Khalsa version of Sikhism, not Sikhism in general. And one can deduce that it's difficult to just assert that she just doesn't believe and doesn't want to allow the religion this degree of authority over her children and herself. But the barrister in question, Baldip Singh, pushes back against this by arranging for an old lady, a bibi, we call them bibi, an elderly lady, sorry, I should say, to go into the woman's house and wash and comb the child's hair daily to prevent her from cutting the hair. This is a ridiculous level of invasion of privacy and the right to private life and to the woman's autonomy. Shall I give you one more case example from Baldip Singh? He claims that a woman is seeking divorce. He's actually talking about a woman that he's supposed to be representing. He's a family law barrister. Please don't go anywhere near him. Because her husband, he says that she's seeking divorce simply because her husband refuses to wash his own underwear. And there is an item of underwear which is called the kashera. It's also part of the 5Ks of the Khalsa version of Sikhism. So it's not a light point. We find it humorous, but it's actually quite a sinister religious point here that he's making. And this is one of his own cases where he's supposed to be representing her. He publicly ridicules her in an interview about her decision to leave the husband and the in-laws, saying it's just because she doesn't want to wash his underwear, right? And it emerges that actually there's much more going on because there's no lock on the bedroom door. The in-laws are in and out of the bedroom. The mother-in-law has quite a lot of weight. Anybody who knows an Asian family knows actually that there's a lot more going on here. And he doesn't appear to represent the woman at all. Instead, he goes over to the husband, who he also says is unrepresented. So this is the victimization, right, of the husband. He's giving him victimhood. He claims he doesn't have any legal representation and brokers a deal with the husband that the husband will put a lock on the door and the mother-in-law will wash the son's kashera, the underpants, okay, in order to keep the marriage intact. So this is the sort of stuff, and this is a level of coercive control, I'm saying, that is kind of being pushed out at a communal level through religious arbitration mechanisms. Stop there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.